It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans, and I am your host here today. It appears that they have finally done it. We here in the United States of America are now living in what could effectively be termed a dictatorship. The news that's coming out of this budget debacle is not only disturbing, it's downright dangerous. One of the aspects that passed in this recent Senate debt deal changes the rules dramatically in how Congress will approve future debt ceiling increases. And how it does that is that now the rules have changed. Going forward, as part of this, and this was a proposal that was originally offered by Mitch McConnell, a Republican from Kentucky, back in 2011. He's a Republican, but this certainly doesn't sound like a Republican principle to me. Here's how it works. Going forward, instead of the president submitting a request for an increase to the debt, which is traditionally how it's always done, and then the Senate votes on whether or not to allow that, the rules have changed. The president will now determine what that increase will be, and it will now be up to the Senate to override the president by a 2/3 majority vote. Ladies and gentlemen, there could not have been a more dictatorial change, fundamental change, in the way in which our nation is governed. This has annexed a significant level, in fact, the most important level of Congress's role, to the executive. The legislature now has weakened their position to the point where, for all intents and purposes, they are a figurehead. With unlimited ability to raise revenue at will, these traitors in Congress have unconstitutionally given away their authority, because our Constitution says that the power of the purse belongs to the House. No longer. Now, the power of the purse belongs to the executive, because in our current situation, in the current makeup of the House and the Senate, there will be no more fights about debt ceiling increases. They will just become routine and mundane. There's an article in Breitbart this morning that discusses this. And there was a report in the National Journal last week that is linked into that story. I'll post this on our Facebook page underneath the comments, and it's up on our Facebook page and our website at americasvoicenow.org. And this journal report actually applauds this change. It's frightening. Here's what it says. Whether 4 weeks from now or in 1 year, there'll be even less reason to put faith in a last-minute deal next time the U.S. is up against the debt limit. Put on your critical thinking hats, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm going to tear this article down so that you understand it. There's only one foolproof way to avoid a future crisis: fundamentally change the way the debt ceiling works. The approach isn't all that radical. Barbara Boxer from California proposed a reform in January that would change the debt ceiling mechanism so that Congress would vote to disapprove of an increase as opposed to approving one. Such a change would limit debt ceiling negotiations to a veto-proof majority while still leaving Congress with some power. Wow. Well, first of all, debt ceiling negotiations are not the purview of the president to make sole determinations. That is where the power of the purse and how and the way in which the House was originally designed by our founders to have some control over the executive. The story goes on to say, the most interesting part of this proposal, it was originally floated in 2011 by Republican leader Senator Mitch McConnell. The potential for a bipartisan deal here that fixes the debt limit problem is real. Really? Senator Barbara Boxer continues to advocate for the change. Right now, though, Harry Reid's office says the senator is not considering any disapproval mechanism, but that could change as the process moves on. Realize, for the record, folks, this story was written before this deal was cut last night. Here's where the story gets ridiculous. Such a plan would obviously be good for Democrats, as they can get the immediate gratification of not having to risk default in order to fully implement the Affordable Care Act. But it'd be good for Republicans, too, who could not only avoid the stigma of blame for a default, but also presumably reap the ruling party rewards in future Congresses and presidencies. It would also put an immediate political target on President Obama and Democrats by association for being the sole entity responsible for raising the debt limit by over $1 trillion. That opportunity has got to sound pretty good to Republicans ahead of 2014. All right. This last paragraph is the one we're going to tear apart. First of all, the assumption by the entire statement of that paragraph is that this is good for parties, but it makes no mention of what the limit or the damage is to America as a nation and to the taxpayers in general. They talk about immediate gratification for Democrats because they wouldn't have to risk default in order to fully fund or implement Obamacare and any other unconstitutional determinations that they make. Any other crazy spending they want to go through. Then they turn to in the next sentence and they say, well, it would be good for Republicans too because they can avoid the stigma of blame for a default. So the assumption here is that it doesn't really matter what's good for America. It only matters what's good for the reputation of the parties. How do they do what they want to do and avoid the responsibility for those decisions and actions? I'm stunned. It also presumably would reap the ruling party rewards in future Congresses and presidencies. And yet, the next step that the president has declared he's going to do is push through immigration, which will completely turn the electorate balance upside down. And at this point, so many Americans are dependent upon the federal government for their livelihood. I mean, we're talking about the most basic of needs, and that was proven earlier this week when the EBT system went down, and these people literally went in and stripped stores of all of their materials and content. If you haven't watched that, I encourage you to go out and find a couple of videos. They're all over YouTube and all over every place. These people were rolling out of there with 8 shopping carts full of food because the EBT system wasn't working. So they'd swipe their card and it would say, unable to confirm, and the store, Walmart actually, allowed them to leave. Walmart later came out with a statement that said, we believe we did the right thing. We don't want starving people to not have what they need. Well, 8 shopping carts is a little excessive, I think. And it wasn't one person. It was multiple people. You see, the real problem here is that this article assumes that what's really important here is not what's right for America. What's really important here is how do the Democrats and the Republicans get away with murder and the public doesn't have any way to hold anyone accountable. There was a New York Times magazine article on the same issue, which remarked that the provision would, quote, defang the debt ceiling. When you hear these words, it's gonna blow your mind. I hope you're gathering the right information from this, because this is the concept of utilizing your critical thinking to understand when you're being misled, and understand that this is nothing short of mind control. This kind of diatribe being pushed out on the media so that it takes the most onerous crimes and makes them sound as if they are just okay. I mean, it's really just, we might look askance at it a little bit, but it's really not a big deal. Listen to the New York Magazine article, their quote. This provision, in other words, the provision that the president now makes all the decisions and Congress has to override the president, not override his veto, but override the president. So essentially, Congress is locked out. There are no negotiations. The president declares the number, and then Congress has one and only one choice: either override it by a 2/3 majority or not. And New York Magazine says it would, quote, defang the debt ceiling, returning it to its historical place as an opportunity for ineffectual posturing rather than extortion. What? This provision will, quote, defang the debt ceiling, returning it to its historical place as an opportunity for ineffectual posturing rather than extortion. Excuse me. Ladies and gentlemen, they're admitting here that this is all kabuki theater, that there is no substance nor reality in everything that we just saw over the course of the last couple of weeks. I got to tell you, Mitch McConnell, he's the guy who originally proposed this back in 2011, and he wanted to invert the process of how the debt ceiling is raised by making it an automatic raise unless Congress voted against it. And that's essentially what they've done. Now, there are those out there who will say, well, of course, the president could always veto it. Their override of the president's decision. Why would he veto his own claim? The ridiculousness of that concept is Orwellian doublespeak. In other words, the president proposes a new debt increase. Let's say it's $1 trillion for nice round numbers. President says we need another $1 trillion. Congress gets the word. There's no discussion in Congress. The way it works now is Congress, the president says I need $1 trillion. Congress throws it around and says we can't give you $1 trillion, we can give you $700 billion. They send it up to the president after they've passed it, negotiated on it, beaten it to death, and then the president can either agree to it or override the veto or override their vote. And then they can, in turn, override the president's veto and say, nope, all you're getting is $700 billion. Now the rules are changed. Now the president says, I need $1 trillion. Congress has only one opportunity to address it, and that is to either override the president's declaration, the dictatorial declaration, or not. What this is an annexing away from Congress the power of the ability to have any control whatsoever over the budget. And it places all of that power squarely in the lap of the executive. Ladies and gentlemen, the Democratic Republic of Amerika is now officially a dictatorship. I'm telling you that you don't realize perhaps the impact that this will have. But I have to tell you, this is the new normal. I'm going to tell you something right now. Strap yourselves in. This ride gets very rough from here on out. Their claim is that this will eliminate the risk of having these kinds of extortionist arguments, and that it will soothe the world's financial outlook on the United States, and it won't create market upset, and blah, 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 blah. Well, for the record, the Chinese rating agency downgraded our sovereign debt rating yesterday anyway, even though we passed this disastrous boondoggle. Despite the fact that we passed it, the Chinese rating agency has downgraded our credit rating, national credit rating. They are warning that fundamentals of a potential default remain unchanged. I'm sure they haven't actually evaluated this particular aspect of the budget deal, because if they did, they would say, oh, well, now we have a cohort in the White House in the seat of power, and because he can basically declare any amount that he wants, we shouldn't really worry anymore. But by the way, don't buy any more of their debt. They marked it down from A to A minus, maintaining a negative outlook. Their statement was, the fundamental situation that the debt growth rate significantly outpaces that of fiscal income and gross domestic product remains unchanged. And in that case, they're right. Our income is falling, our jobs are evaporating, and yet at the same time, they're borrowing even more money. The statement goes on to say, hence the government is still approaching the verge of a default crisis, a situation that cannot be substantially alleviated in the foreseeable future. Now, that news comes on the heels of another very interesting statement and news flash, which will never make the mainstream Ministry of Propaganda news media. And that is that GM got a bailout, and the Treasury Department assisted them in shipping jobs to China. I'm only referencing this story because it's relevant in this case because of the Chinese downgrade. General Motors was in bankruptcy. We bailed them out. It cost us $51 billion to bail them out. We're now liquidating our holdings. And as part of that bailout, basically, there was a clause in there that said that they had to ramp up production of vehicles based on these targets on an annualized basis. In the first year, they had to produce a new target of 1.8 million vehicles in 2010. That was supposed to rise to 2.26 vehicles by 2014. GM has never made the target, by the way. And last year, they fell about 13,000 cars short of the 2 million target. So what happened? Well, February, the Treasury Department irrevocably waived certain of its rights regarding the federal loan. And basically, that was the certain manufacturing volume increase requirement. And then what happened? GM announced in June, just a scant 4 months later, that they were going to stop releasing North American production figures altogether. And here's the best part. They are going to now boost their output from their Chinese plants by 70%. They're increasing their export production, not just for Chinese cars now. They're increasing the production from export from 77,000 to 130,000 units. So in other words, basically the Treasury and the taxpayers funded GM's move to China. The comment in this article is telling. It says, it doesn't take a PhD in economics to see what's really going on. GM cannot make the domestic production targets and still turn a profit. It wants to be spared the embarrassment of having everyone know that. Obama, who is in this as deep as anyone can be, doesn't want the embarrassment either. So both buried the news. Ladies and gentlemen, I got to tell you, I think at this point in time, we can safely say that the United States of America is finished. To make matters worse, Mitch McConnell, who introduced this boondoggle concept of giving the president basically a blank check that we have to now override his choice. We have to veto the president. Who ever heard of such a thing? This new deal that they signed last night just happened to include a $3 billion earmark for a dam project in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell's state. Mitch, a.k.a. Judas McConnell, has sold America down the river for generations to come for 3 billion pieces of silver. We're going to take a break. When we return, we're going to tackle another topic, which is this issue with Mitch McConnell selling out America for his own personal gain. Our third segment is, I didn't even tell you what the segments were. I'm so frustrated about this. Chase Manhattan has released that letters to all of their corporate clients, limiting cash withdrawals and banning all international wire transfers. In other words, they're not letting money leave the country. This is backed up by lots of documentation and actual letters. And guess what? It's not out there in the mainstream media anywhere. We're going to cover that in just a moment. Stick with us. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Perhaps the last sane voice of the people in the United States of America. Hoo boy, we're in trouble. You can find us on americasvoicenow.org, our website. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/America's Voice Now. And you can find this and every other video program that we do, which is a video broadcast of our radio program on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/America's Voice Now. We'll return in just a moment. Stick with us.